Come join Melissa and her guests on the Chats from the Blog Cabin podcast. From North Carolina, this podcast will have you feeling like you've known these folks for years. Listen in as they chat about life, culture, current events, and more, all with a special Southern flair. Curl up with your favorite beverage and get ready to be entertained. Tune in now for a unique experience that's fun and insightful.
Hey y'all, welcome back to another episode of Chats from the Blog Cabin. You know, the show where I virtually invite people into the blog cabin to chat about life. And today we're chatting with Ed, who wrote the book, The Island of the Four Ps, a modern fable about preparing for your future. And Ed, before we get into your book, tell us a little about yourself.
It's hard to introduce in a short term because these 87 years took a long time. But I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a grandfather. Some people recognize me as a CEO. Some people call me a philanthropist. Now I'm an author of sorts. My wife says, now you've taken on a new moniker. I've worked for some of the biggest firms on Wall Street over a 50 to 60 year period. I was the chairman of the board of trustees of a university. I gave them the largest gift in their 150-year history, which was a lot of luck and a little bit of a strain on the family. And then I even founded a golf course.
Wow.
As you'll find from my discussion, it surely wasn't meant to be necessarily. It wasn't destiny for sure. And it wasn't in the stars. But I'm glad that it turned out like it did.
So what made you decide to step away from corporate and write a book? Because that doesn't seem like it kind of flows, and especially this type of book.
Well, I've always been fascinated by fables, and I'll get into that before. But the reason I wrote the book is that when I was 18 years old and left the orphanage, I decided I would bury my background completely, not tell anybody. Even my wife, I told her some of it, but never all of it. Never told my children much about it, and very few of my friends. A little bit of denial in my mind was a good deal, because in that respect, I didn't have to explain to everybody that I lived in a post office box and my mother supposedly died when I was 3 and all the other details. I could be a regular person. And in 1958, 54, 58, at college, very few young people there were very few orphans that were in the class. So I didn't want to be too different. So I kept that for about 65 years. And when I was in my early 70s, my wife and my children started to put pressure on me. And then the university started to put pressure on me. And then Horatio Alger came in and said, you have to tell your background. So I decided I'd write it in a book. And I always been fascinated by fables. I think fables are a way of communicating ideas over the years. And think back, you could argue that the Bible is just a collection of fables. And of course, there's Aesop's fables, and there's Gulliver's Travels, and there's, Don Quixote. And of course, in modern era, Who Moved My Cheese, which was one of my favorite books, So then The Alchemist and so on. So I tried to write that. And I also felt that I wanted to communicate a set of ideas. And there's so many self-help books as I do this, do that. I find that fables trap you into doing your own thinking. Yeah. And really, in many respects, to convey a real idea, what you want to do is to have the person do his own thinking and to take some of your template or your process and use it for themselves. And that's why the thing evolved the way it did. And I just started writing, and I had a ghostwriter from Harvard, and we sat down every weekend for 2 years, and we kept evolving this thing. And what happened basically is in each part of the book, we saw that like there are in most fables, 2 or 3 levels, and the levels maybe are determined by the reader. Mm-hmm. When we climb from the village of passions to the village of principles, you're climbing up a mountain, which is difficult to do, which is obviously establishing your principles is something that's difficult. So there's sort of allegory runs through the whole book, I think. And it's only 2.5 hours of listening and maybe a couple, 3 hours of reading. So that's why I think fables are very important. You get a lot in a short period of time. But the real reason for writing the original book, which was On the Road Less Travel, I wrote this book first. And the whole thing has taken me close to 10 years. But I wrote this book first, and I put it aside when a ghostwriter told me, you cannot do this. You have to write your autobiography first. So I wrote the On the Road Less Travel first. That took me into 2 or 3 more years. And I put that out. Then I decided I would print this book because I'm a little bit of a crusade right now of helping young people, especially those people that are entering college. In other words, in many respects, you have no control over who you are until you're somewhere in the 16 to 20 year, you start to recognize that you have to sort of control your own fate. And I like schools to take freshmen in college or seniors in high school and start them to ask questions that are in this book. And so they start to define their own lives a bit more. You go to college and they teach you chemistry and calculus and maybe teach you how to think, how to work, but they don't ask you who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And in today's world, I think that's more and more important because the world has gotten, much more complicated since I was in school. That's too much. I'm sorry.
No, it's not too much. And you raised a great point. A lot of kids coming out of high school and coming out of college don't even know how to write a check or don't know simple, basic life skills. So that's very important that we teach that.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned your background. Can you give us a little bit about your background? About, you said you were an orphan.
Well, it was a little bit of, I actually didn't understand it until I wrote the book. But when I started writing the book, I luckily saved all the letters from my father, and before he died, saved all of my letters. So I spread them out on a table. It's interesting the fact that you have facts and have what you remember, and sometimes it's different.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've spent quite a bit of time trying to really get it down to facts. What had happened basically, and there's a lot of a story. It's a long story, so if you really want the whole thing, you got to read On the Road Less Traveled. But basically, when I was 3 years old, my mother and father got divorced. I was born in 1936 to an unemployed father and a homemaker mother. So when I was born, my father didn't have a job, and my mother was 15 years younger, and he controlled her and would let her work and so on. After 6 years of marriage, in 1939, she said, "It's over." She got custody of me. He got $5 a week of alimony and child support. She took me from Los Angeles to St. Louis, where her family was. When she arrived in St. Louis, she was one of 5 siblings. Her father and mother said, it's not a good idea. We don't need another 2 mouths to feed in 1939. So the arrival was not good. My father arrived for visiting rights on Sunday, a month or so later, and instead of taking me to the park or a movie, he got back on Highway 66. He got back on Highway 66 in his 1939 Roadster, and this is the book On the Road Less Traveled, and we went back to Los Angeles. He called my mother from the road and said, don't look for us or else. And somewhere along the line, he told me that my mother had died and I would never see her. And I never saw a picture of her. The next couple of years, he was a merchant marine. He was at sea a great deal of the time. I lived with friends and relatives and so forth. No relatives. We didn't have any relatives, friends and neighbors and so forth. But in 1941, everything changed when Pearl Harbor occurred, and he was drafted or volunteered to become an officer in the Merchant Marines. That started a period of 5 foster homes in the Los Angeles area, which varied from, I would say, cold and abusive to the last one, which was warm and caring. The war ended, and father wanted me back. He ended up on the East Coast. So I flew from Los Angeles to New York and ended up spending the summer of 1946 in the YMCA on 34th Street. And I must admit, I didn't meet anybody who had graduated from Yale. So it was a rather unusual place. But in September, we went to a hotel room in Coney Island. I was enrolled in the local public school. Dad spent the year frustrating, trying to find work, land-based work, and gave up finally, and went back to sea. And the summer of 1947, actually, because of a mess up, there was some woman who was going to take me to live with her, and she changed her mind. I ended up spending a serious period of time by myself at 11 years old in a hotel room, and he took care of the meals and so forth at a delicatessen. That September, he was able to get me into an orphanage in Far Rockaway. I spent 3 years in that orphanage, and I traded in my room in the hotel for my private bathroom. It was a small hotel, but for a room with 50 guys in it, and a bathroom with 10 shower heads and 10 sinks. But all my belongings were in a room in a drawer under my bed. But for the first time in my life, I got 2 things I never had before, which was community, which is a group of young people, and consistency. Things happened every day, and there was no. And I flourished at the local public school. But when I was 14 years old, I aged out of this particular orphanage, and my father completely disappeared. It was the 4th time he essentially abandoned me in 18 years. And I got, luckily, I could have been sent any place. It took about a year to transfer me to become a ward of the state. And then luckily, instead of putting me in some bad institution, they put me in another orphanage in Yonkers, New York, which was 5 blocks from a fabulous, public high school. And at that point, I got an epiphany. I said, the way out of this mess is a private college. So I put my head down, and I did well. I was a varsity athlete and did well in math and science. And when I graduated, I applied to every scholarship. There weren't many in that day, 3 or 4. And I luckily got the NROTC scholarship, and that changed my life completely. I mean, I can still remember getting the letter. I can still remember walking into the church downtown New York and going in and saying thank you, because it really changed my life. Because those days, the Naval Scholarship gave you books and tuition and $50 a month for 4 years. And then you had to spend, obviously, 3 years in the Navy as a naval officer, and you obviously had to get through school, because if you flunked out, they put you in as enlisted man. So that was my background as a child. It reads like fiction, actually, when you read the book, but it actually happened, and it was a difficult circumstance. And I had a great deal of difficulty with my first ghostwriter, because she wanted me to hate my father, and I didn't. I loved my father because I understood what he had gone through. He had basically been an immigrant, became extremely successful, and you'll see a picture of his airplane, 1929, lost everything in 29-33, including his mother. He was very close to his mother. So that creates demons, and it prevents you from really living the rest of your life. And he struggled for his entire life with this loss of everything. So that's not a thumbnail. That's a little, again, too long. My daughter worked for TED Talks, and she says, Dad, you always answer the question too long. So
No, you're good. You are so good. But there's one thing that I wanted to, first of all, I love the fact that you said that the ghostwriter wanted you to hate your father, and you said no. I understood, and a lot of kids don't understand when they're going through this process that why this is happening to them. A lot of kids are like, "Why is this happening? Why don't they love me?" But you never questioned your dad's love for you.
I didn't question it actually later on in life, but I never questioned it at the time because he was the only thing I had. If I didn't have him, I wouldn't have anybody. And I always tell people, say, give me a 4-line description of your life. I said, nobody came to my grammar school graduation. Nobody came to my high school graduation. Nobody came to my college graduation. Nobody came to my graduate school graduation, because Dad was always either at sea or in trouble. I did find out why he abandoned me the last time. He was in court and he got stuck. There was a horrible situation. And I found out the papers came to me 50 years later and told me why he basically didn't show up. I went to his hotel and I couldn't find him, and he didn't show up to 3 or 4 years later. So, and we never discussed it but I loved him because he would write letters to me and say, Ed, you're the greatest. I want you to do this. Make sure you keep yourself, cleanliness is next to godliness. He was there, and in letters and phone calls and telegrams and so forth. And, and you have to understand, his job was to be at sea aboard a ship. So how could he take care of a child? And he didn't realize that, by the way. My father was a feeler and not a thinker. He was impulsive and so on. So, and it's very difficult. He would send me pictures of himself in foreign countries with little kids all around him. He would take boxes of candy and go to the local square and give it out. So he had a good heart. He just had a difficult life.
And then you also mentioned too that as soon as you got your scholarship, you went to the church and you thanked God. So
that's right. Well, the 5 foster homes were Catholic foster homes, and I got my principles from besides my father, from the nuns. If you go to a Catholic school, I can't communicate to everybody. Catholic schools basically, they teach you the rule, which is the golden rule, with the golden ruler across your knuckles if you don't learn it. Then they throw in the 10 commandments, and they tell you that's there are a lot of other do's and don'ts. And then they tell you very clearly that if you follow this rule, you end up in that nice place. And if you don't, you end up in the other place. And as a 6, 7, 8, 10, 9-year-old, you believe, and it still impacts me. I still have any kind of difficulty doing anything really wrong because I have this inbred in me, and the nuns did that, and it's a training process, and I learned a lot of principles from them, which I carry with me forever. And and God is one of them. I'm not sure he's the same person he was when I was 10 years old, or she, as it were, or it, as it were. but it's there. It's, God is a very important part of my life. I pray every day because I think one of the things that I found out is that if you pray for someone, it helps them. It's a kind of a corny, I've read a lot of books about, you send a vibe out and say, Melissa's sick. I really hope she gets better. And, and for whatever reason, it seems to work, sometimes anyway.
Yeah, I love that. We need to take a brief commercial break, but we'll be right back.
The threats women face today are unparalleled and even more dangerous than ever before. 1 in 3 women globally has been the victim of an assault. Women are terrified and they are looking for answers.
In the book, Street Smart Safety for Women, we draw on our experiences, both personal and professional, to provide those answers. It's by women, for women. Street Smart Safety for Women is available wherever books are sold.
And we are back chatting with Ed, who wrote The Island of the Four Ps, a modern fable about preparing for your future. Now, I told you before we came on, I love this book. It almost felt like I was walking through each little section that they were going through with them. And I love how you put principles. It's entertaining, but it's also teaching as well. But I got to know, I wish all of us had that little itty bitty thing that he carried in his pocket. What did you call that?
It's a testamark.
How did you come up with that idea?
Well, we wanted to your mind is really the testamark. You all through your life, you collect things and you store them. We just wanted something physical to basically make that as an example. And it had four parts to it. The testamark is a 4-part thing. And our idea was these four ideas. These 4 words, by the way, cover almost everything. So that's why I dug it. And by the way, the words that I used, I went back and looked at my yellow pads, and their passions and principles and partners and plans were in my yellow pads. But we wanted something that he would carry with him, because really, in many respects, that's what you do. You carry these thoughts with you all the time. And in many respects, we do essentially, tap the testamark. It happened to be tapped maybe your forehead instead of testamark. But it had, again, in a fable, we're able to do something like that. In other words, if we wrote a book about, how to do things, you would say, let's look into your head and put this in your head. But this, we gave you a testamark, and it gave you something extra to think about. As you said, you got it, because it's exactly what we wanted. We wanted you to walk along with Thalia and Marcus and Archimedes. And, Archimedes is not a teacher, it's a guide. But no one can really teach you anything. They can guide you in direction. So in many respects, I found out my children, I guide them, but I don't teach them.
I love that. Now you have your book with you, correct?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Do you want to read a part of your book for us?
Oh, I guess I can, but I guess the beginning is probably the best part. We worked very hard on the opening, and the Island of the Four Ps is about decisions that we make and how we make them. The decision-making touchstones I use are the 4 Ps, and they've guided me through my lifetime. Is there anything certain in this world? There isn't. We will face innumerable forks in the road, decision points that affect our destinies. As you begin your journey, I hope the story in the pages that follow will provide direction and inspiration. Is that enough?
If you want, go ahead and read a little bit more.
I could have not written The Island of the Four Ps without the help and encouragement of my family, colleagues, who provided me with unconditional love and support. I can go on. There are many other little passages that I find, here's one I think that applies right now. Let's be frank. We live in unusual times, and we really do. Think about, the stuff that's going on right now. 2 wars, a difficult political situation, enormous impact from AI that's going to change quite a bit of things. So, and this book was written, in 10 years ago. It says, but I revamped the introduction. It said, let's be frank, we live in unusual times. The future normal, quote unquote, is going to be very different from what most of us have experienced in the past. It's going to be even more dynamic and perhaps less certain. I would say leave out the perhaps. It's going to be less certain. We'll see enormous changes in our culture, our economy, and our day-to-day lives. And that's starting to happen in spades right now. The advantage of 2023, some of these changes will be driven by our new understandings of what the word pandemic means. But the drivers of change will be far broader. next decade, digitalization, artificial intelligence, automation are going to fundamentally change what work, community, career, and success mean to most people. In fact, many of the jobs that American workers will form in the 2030s haven't even been invented yet. At the same time, many effects of climate change will force us to consider new ways of interacting with the world around us and conducting our day-to-day lives. That's pretty good stuff.
I love that.
Everybody thinks their wife's beautiful. That's the whole deal.
Now, you mentioned in your book about creating a life plan. How essential is that for life? Because did you have a life plan when you started out your whole thing?
These are the yellow pads, what I call my me pads. I always took out a pad of paper and I tried to write. I think someone early on, one of my professors said, there's thinking is fuzzy, talking is pretty fuzzy, but if you write it down, then you can look back and see what you thought. And so I started writing very early, writing down, what I wanted, where I wanted to go, and what I wanted to do, and how I was going to get there. And so that's my concept of a plan. And my goal, this crazy, presumptuous mission I'm on, is that a college student graduates both with a diploma and a life plan, maybe written in pencil, so it has to be changed because there's so many things that change in life. But at least as soon as you write down a plan and say, I want to go here, then you get a chance to test it. And I am living proof of that. I was very good in math and science. And in my freshman year, I decided to be a physicist. So, I took advanced physics instead of engineering physics my sophomore year. And boy, within about 3 or 4 months, I looked around and said, boy, this isn't for me. These people are not my people. I can't keep up with this. I really don't want to keep up with this. It's too much work. It's not that interesting, and so on. And I got out of that with a D+, went back into engineering physics and graduated as a chemical engineer. Even there, I didn't know the word engineer is a huge spectrum. And one of the things that fascinated me were very large. See, I wrote these things down. I said I was very interested in big projects, dams, electrical plants, and so forth. So at the time in Rochester, north was there was the St. Lawrence Seaway. They were building the St. Lawrence Seaway, huge project. So I hitchhiked up there one summer, got a job, and I had a ball. It was a wonderful experience. I was in a blasting team. I did all kinds of different stuff up there. I don't know how I got in there, but they hired me, they liked me. And I realized I loved the work, but I didn't want to spend 10 years in a middle of no place in a trailer. So I found that particular, being a civil engineer, working on big projects, was not for me. And this goes on through my entire life. When I was at the business school, I wanted to be an international businessman. So I worked in Belgium one summer. I learned French from scratch. And that didn't work. I said that, it was too early. 1964 was not a good time to be an international businessman. And I've slowly found my passion over time of what I really wanted to do by testing. That's my magic word for young people. Don't waste your summers. Test. And the more you test, the more you can find out who you really are and what you really want to do and what you can do.
It sounds like you've gone through a lot of life changes. Like you have a lot of passions and trying to narrow it down, like in the book where he had a lot of passions and trying to figure out what was going on and what road to lead. It looks like you put yourself in this book. Like you actually wrote your experience. I almost think this is an autobiography just listening to you.
Well, that's what I want people to basically recognize, that your passions change. I mean, when you're 4 years old, you want to be an ice cream truck driver, right? Or an astronaut. And when you go to college, high school, my math and science, baseball, basketball, and girls, that's what, that was my thing. And when I went to college, math and science quickly morphed, a little side into physics, back into engineering, and from engineering into chemical engineering. And my baseball and basketball, after my freshman year, I found out I would not be a professional athlete. And I was convinced that because I could hit a baseball a country mile, but I was, 5'7", 125 pounds, it wasn't going to work. So I dropped out of that and, I went into extracurricular activities. And there I found my passion in my junior year. I didn't know it at the time, but because I was testing, I did everything on campus. I mean, having this orphanage background, I kept myself very busy, so I didn't think about it. But one of the projects I had was in my junior year, I started a humor magazine. And I found my passion, which was to put people together, to solve a problem, to produce a product, start a program. And I also I liked even things when there were resistance, and there was enormous resistance. The president didn't want it, the provost didn't want it, the librarian didn't want it. But I took these 30 people and we put them together. And inside that passion, I found an even a further, more exciting one, which was I really enjoyed helping people do better than they thought they could. Even the guy, the cartoonist, who I couldn't draw a straight line with a ruler, but I helped him and I got a kick out of it. And later on in life, sort of early career and then mid-career, I started to realize that I was a relatively successful businessman because of these two passions. One, I love putting people together, and they recognized I love doing that. And they all felt that I was trying to help them be better than they thought they could. And then, my passions, morphed again. My passion now is, communicating ideas, and that requires a totally different set of principles and ideas and so forth. But I think that's actually positive, because today's world, just like you, young people will have to pivot. You pivot, and then you're going to pivot again somewhere along the line. I've pivoted, as my wife says, from businessman to author now. In fact, people in my neighborhood said, "There's the author." And my freshman English teacher would turn over his grave if he thought that somebody thought that, because I got C's in all my papers my freshman year. My writing was terrible.
Yeah, I love the fact that you took your passion and you ended up climbing basically the corporate ladder because you were so passionate about it. You looked at your job not as a job, but something that you were excited. A lot of people just take a job just to earn that money, and not even, it's a job, and at the end of the day they close. But it looks like you looked for something that was going to give you passion, that on the side note and the extra advantage, it gave you some money too. But
Oh yeah, well, I happened to pick the right industry at the right time. But here again, that's why I want kids to do plans, because I got the wind at my back. I mean, everybody gives me this great deal of credit for I grew this firm 20 times in 20 years, from 1983 to 1997, early 2000. But during that period, the stock market went up 10 times. And if you read biographies today, almost every successful person, at least at some point in their life, ended up with the wind at their back. And even when there's not money involved, I look back at one of my acquaintances, a fellow graduated with a specialty in surgery for curvature of the spine. He could have gotten a job any place in America, but he went to a place where there was the greatest demand, which was Africa. He was one of two people who could do what he could do. And after 30 or 40 years, I mean, the demand is enormous for what he does. And he saved and changed so many lives because he was in that with the wind at his back. Now, he's not made a lot of money, but he's had a terrific life because he's pursued his passion where there was great demand.
wow. I mean, that's just, now you mentioned earlier in the very beginning that you founded a golf course. How did that all come about?
One of my secrets alive, there's three secrets. One is anything's possible. Second thing is education is a solution to almost everything. The third one is never be a victim. If you use your energy, if you can use your energy to be a victim, or you can use your energy to find out my two magic words, which were the last words in my book, what's next? And what happened in the golf course is I went to Nantucket, and I was a fairly senior person. We were involved in lots of charities, as a trustee of a university and so on. But I got rejected at the local golf club completely. They, told me not to come back, and you're never going to be a member. And so instead of, being a victim or leaving the island, I decided to build my own golf course. So I found some land, and I built one. I helped build one. I was not the real prime mover, but in Vail, a group of us had built a golf course. So I called the guy that did the golf course in Vail. I said, "Why don't you come to Nantucket? I found 300 acres. Maybe we can build a golf course." And of course we did. We raised the money to do it, and it became the #1 best golf course built in 1997. This is by Golf Magazine. Everybody, we were #1. And then the clubhouse 2 years later became the #1 clubhouse built in that particular year. But I'm not even proud of that. What I'm really proud of is after 25 years now, we're the largest charity on the island.
Wow.
We have 60 kids in school. We'll have 100 within 2 years in various kinds of schools. We have both academic and what I call professional. Used to call it vocational. I tried to change the name. But we're the largest charity on the island. We supply 50 other charities. We put 30 or 40 kids through college, and now we have about 40 kids in professional nurses, marine engineers. We have a couple of chefs. It's kind of fun, and we've really changed the island. At first, we were considered a little bit questionable. A bunch of rich people building a golf course. Now, if you go downtown with our logo, people walk over to you and say thank you. because we do so much for the island. So that's and you know, I just did that sort of because I had to. And I wanted to play golf and I wanted to stay on the island. And so the good Lord took care of me and helped me find the land. And, we raised the money. Here again, wind was at my back. Everybody said, you're going to fail. Because we charged $100,000 and the other golf course was charging 15. So you're never going to make it. But there was a huge demand for golf on the island, a latent demand. The wind was at my back. In fact, we sold we sold $45 million worth of memberships before we moved to shovel of dirt because there was just so much demand for golf at that time. And nobody realized it. What happened basically is, my husband and wife would come to the island and the wife would love it. The husband said, I can't play golf. I'm not coming. So, I go to the golf course and I get, people's wives hugging me and say, thank you, because I wouldn't be here without my husband's ability to play golf. Now, of course, the ladies play golf as much as the men. My wife plays about as much golf as I do. So
I love that. Now,
it's a good story. And it's true and it's wonderful. And I get such a kick out of it. And also it's a sanctuary. Golf is a piece of art done with a bulldozer. You drive through that gate, and your blood pressure just goes down. It's wonderful. Anyway, excuse me.
No, not a problem. What did the club that denied you the membership? What did they do once they realized that you were? Because I got to know, once they realized you were going to build your own golf course and you're as successful as
They
you
just
are.
said we were going to fail. That basically it was. Other guys will never make it. You're not going to be able to do it. And right now it's because COVID has even filled up all golf courses. But no, they said, and there was some people at the club and some of my friends. I was recommended there by one of the senior members of the club, and he was kind of happy and giggling and saying, hey, you guys made a mistake. So, and I'm glad they did, because at the 25th anniversary of our golf course, I made a little talk and I started out with thanking the board of directors of that club for rejecting me.
Have you had members from that club come and since join yours?
Oh yeah, and vice versa. By the way, a lot of our club members have left our club and joined them. We're friendly, but we didn't get into a competition. We stayed very friendly, and still today, very friendly between the two clubs.
Now, when you were that little boy and you were going into the orphanage, did you ever think that your life was going to be as beautiful as it is, with your wife, your own family, your grandchildren, writing books, being a CEO, founding a golf course? Did you ever in your million years think your life was going to be like that?
Not a chance. Not a chance. I mean, I remember thinking if I ever made $100,000, I'd be in heaven. And we haven't talked about principles, but after you have all through your life, you change your principles. And my biggest principle today is gratitude. At my age, people ask, how are you? And I say, I'm grateful. And that's really it. I am grateful. I've been more than lucky. And of course, I was born at the right time. What's interesting, I tell people you have to be very careful, and you should read books and understand your geographic and your historical context. My year, 1936, I haven't got exact figures on it, but we were one of the smallest cohort of births in the history of the country as a percentage of population, because it was right in the beginning of the Depression. People said it's going to go away, stuff, families and so forth. By 36, they said, wait a second, this is going to be really tough, And of course, the stuff was starting to turmoil, started in Europe and so on. And lucky I was born at the right time. And from 1983 on, America has been, an unbelievable place. So if you were in anything at that particular point in time, that's one of the problems with America. People think it's going to be good like this always, and it wasn't. When I grew up in the Depression, then there was war, and then in the 70s we had huge inflation. So, if you contrast my 70 years with my father's 70 years, I mean, he did have a couple of good years in the 20s, but he went through the Spanish flu, the First World War, Depression, Second World War, inflation, and then by the time he was 70, he had a pretty tough life.
Yeah. Now, what do your kids think about the fact that you've, left corporate and now you're writing books?
Well, initially my daughter was very nervous that some skeleton would come out of my closet and ruin my life. So I told her most of the skeletons are dead by now, so not a problem. But no, she was nervous. And she also she was legitimate in that I had a mantra, which I had on my wall when I was on Wall Street, which was to live happy, was to live hidden. In other words, stay out of the press. Don't talk to any Melissas of the world. Be a person who's your own person. Be quiet. No, don't, even though I was CEO, a lot of people didn't recognize me because I really wanted to focus on my business, focus on my family, and I didn't have time, energy, or I was a little bit afraid of going public. And now, I'm in the public arena, trying to do what I'm trying to do now. It's a totally new experience for me. It's not exciting, and it's probably the right time in my life to do it. But my kids both my boys thought it was the greatest. My daughter was sort of not sure, Dad. You spent your life not being in the public arena. Now you're in the public arena. She's very helpful. She's a very good writer, and she actually wrote my first 18 years I couldn't write it because I kept welling up. I buried this experience so well that when I started to get into it, I started to feel uncomfortable. I couldn't do it. She wrote the first draft. Now that I've done it, I've been talking about it for 3 or 4 years. It's pretty easy for me. But in those days, I couldn't talk about being in an orphanage or talk about, not having, things because I had a lot of my disadvantages became advantages. And that's one of the things I'm selling to young people in this book. Anybody that's got a bad background actually has an advantage because if you're in 15 or 20 different places by the time you're 18 years old, you really are adaptable. You can handle almost anything. So you have something that a lot of people don't have. You also have resilience, you have perseverance, and you got some unique self-confidence. You also have the other thing, you have anger. Because, all through that period you say, why me? You just said that too. Why me? Why am I an orphan? Why didn't I learn to ride a bicycle? Why didn't I learn how to swim? Why can't I have money to take a young lady out to dinner? I couldn't do that in high school. I had to work every day. And I had dates, but it was complicated. And of course, there were a lot of mothers that didn't want their daughters to go out with the kids from the orphanage. That was not a good long-term idea.
Now, going back to your book, you talk about it's the island of the 4 Ps. So what are the 4 Ps?
Well, it's passions, principles, partners, and plans. And I used an island because that's what happens to a young person when they're 18 years old, get dropped off on a college campus or their first job away from home. It's the first time that they're alone. Now, I provide them with a guide, but even in the early chapter, it says, the guide says, the young man says, does everybody have a guide? And the guide says, no. Some people wander around for a long time without a guide. So it's another little allegory, seek a guide early in your life. And, each one of these little ideas, I'm hoping people catch on that you should have a guide. If you don't have a guide, you might wander around for a long time and not find the answers you want. The 4 Ps and I do believe the 4 Ps almost cover all of the aspects of your life. And I do, in the book, in the second chapter and the third chapter, I lay out what I call the parts of life: self, family, work, community. And community is what I call giving back. And I believe to have a successful life, you have to you cannot be in balance. You have to develop a balance or a harmony between those 4 things. It's very important. But you're never going to be in balance because by definition, if you focus on one of the areas like work, the others get neglected. So the key to life is finding out how far out of balance you are and move back toward balance. But you're never going to be in balance by definition. But those 4 things really count. And each one of them might take a part, like self. Let's talk about you and I, Melissa. We're both basically results of our genes. And for the first 18 years of our life, we have no control over our environment. And who you are is an interplay between your genes and your environment. So who you are, you have no control. You have no responsibility for who you are. But at 18 or so, when you get dropped at that first job or the university, all of a sudden you start saying, who am I? And how do I control this, that, and the other thing? What are my strengths and my weaknesses and why? I mean, what's really funny in my life, and it's brought home to me, is I had nothing else to look at except I thought I was kind of my father until I found my mother. Then I realized that was the other half of me. And I realized some of my aspects. I realized I wasn't like my father like this because I was like my mother. But when you're 18, you all of a sudden, you're free to sort of take yourself on. So you have self. then you have family. And for me, family is very important because I didn't have one. But it's the most important thing by far because it's what's left over after everything is said and done.
Mm-hmm.
But work is vital because it's the way you earn your living, the way you make a contribution to society. And finally, community. Some people don't bother with community. They go through life without really giving back and they can get away with it. But I found, and I communicate this to people, that giving back has been the greatest satisfaction of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that's the reason we're on this planet, is to give back. And I don't think you'll ever get a bigger thrill than when somebody stands up on a stage and says, you know, if it wasn't for you, Mr. Hajim, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be in college. I wouldn't get through life. And I had that experience. My poster child is a 100-pound, 5-foot little lady who got a PhD in optical engineering, you know, and got an MBA in her spare time, and she still is a concert pianist and a concert violinist. And she said that. Said, if it wasn't for you, Mr. Hajim, I would never have gotten this all done. So, you know, that's a heart pounder. And you know, and there's so many different ways to contribute. And you don't have to be a big spender. You can do lots of different things to give back and get satisfaction. And it really is something that has to be done. So these are the 4 parts of life. And in each one of these 4 parts of life, I want you to pour in the 4 P's. Into self, I want you to pour in passions, principles, partners, and plans. Into family, I want you to do the same thing. And so those are those 8 words I want you to live by, or try to live by, and add your own. I'm not afraid to, you know, I haven't got a license on all the words, but if you go through these 8 words, I think you're going to cover most of the bases, and I think you'll come out with better decisions, like I said in my first chapter.
Yeah, I honestly think so too, because I mean, this book is, like you said, you wrote it as a fable, but you educated some. I mean, I literally was highlighting the book, and I was like, because I had it on my Kindle. I have the actual thing copy, but I went and bought the Kindle so I could keep the highlights and I could pass the book on to somebody else, because there's just so much knowledge and so much wisdom in this book that.
And it's short too.
Yes, it's short and it's entertaining. It's not like you're reading. It's not like a self-help book that you're reading and you're going, okay, this is dry. I can't read. I can read a couple pages at a time. This one keeps you engaged and entertained the whole time, and you don't realize you're learning something when you're reading it. But then afterwards, you're like, oh my gosh,
you got it exactly what a fable does to you. You don't know you're learning when you are, because you're being trapped into doing your own thinking. By the audio version, by the way, the gal did a fabulous job. 6 voices, so she's you know that, and it's a 2.5-hour listen. So that's a pretty good thing. And you know, people put it on their car, and 2.5 hours later. And by the way, some people have read it 2 and 3 times. And each time you read it, you get a little something else out of it, because not because the book is doing it to you, it's you that's toiling through these things.
Honestly, I think this should be given to every college graduate and every high school graduate when they graduate. I think that should be a perfect gift. Just hand them this book and say, I know you don't like to read. Here's the audio version. Here's the other version. Just read this book. I promise you'll get something from it and you won't be so discouraged, because a lot of kids that are coming out of college and high school now, they're like, okay, we got our degree. Now what? What do I do?
Exactly. And in the planning chapter, the first example, what happens is they get into a tower and they go through history and they look at what they call the theme drivers, the economy, technology, demographics, geography. And you find each of these are drivers. I mean, I can chapter and verse. If you take one driver like geography, my middle son went to Colorado, got a master's degree in architecture, went into real estate. You almost can't miss. For the last 30 years in Colorado. Even more so, one of my classmates at Harvard was a Chinese fellow. He went to Hong Kong and went into real estate in 1964. I mean, he's a billionaire. You're at the right place at the right time. So studying that first column that you sit in there, and you sit in a chair and you go up and down, and then the next chair you can take any one of those things and study them and how they affected things. I think that's what kids have to do more of. And this, they can marry their principles and their passions to a wave, boy, then you got it. And that's what you just said. They come out, they don't know what they want to do. By the way, they haven't tested enough either. Those 4 summers, people ask me, why go to graduate school? I say, well, first of all, you get a chance to look at everything one more time. Second thing is, you develop a whole body of new friends. And in my case, they're they stuck with me more than my college friends. But third, more importantly, almost get 3 more summers. You can fool around, you can go out and find out whether you really want to do something or not, And I did that. I mean, I was destined to be an international businessman. When I was in the Navy, I'd studied Japanese. I loved the whole experience of being in foreign countries, dealing with foreign people. And I made 2 very definite trips. One to Belgium to work for Belgian Chemical Company. Next summer, I actually helped establish a business school in Nicaragua, the Escuela de Negocios in Managua, Nicaragua, because I thought, well, I can't take over, business in Europe. I'll take over a country. And I found out that was not a good idea either. Between the corruption and the businesses were very small and very difficult. And I found that luckily I was just too early. International business really didn't flourish until, almost the 90s, and it was just, you couldn't get ahead. I mean, you probably could do okay, but I went into the financial business and it was a little tiny business. People say, oh, Ed, you're just a Wall Street guy. When I went to Wall Street, I mean, there were tiny firms. I mean, my firm, when I went to Lehman Brothers, they had 24 million of capital. They trade $24 million in a nanosecond now, but they had 24 millions of total capital. The company I went to work for originally was a mutual fund company, and had 3 million in revenues. And it's now got $2 trillion worth of assets. Wow. Those days it had 300 million. So, so I found a theme, something, and also the idea of putting people together. That's what you do in the financial business. You could say, all right, let's get together. We're going to study this particular part of the market, or we're going to take on this particular product. And that's what I did really well. I was able to put people together, and people trusted me to appreciate them. And there again, principles. Yep. The principle of putting people together. What do you need for a principle? I found a principle early on, which was, it's a cliche, you can accomplish almost anything. And I wrote this on my wall: if you don't care who gets the credit. If you don't get, and then I took it one step further than that. As I got older, I started to deflect credit. If I said, Melissa says, Ed, you've done a great job. You wrote a great book. I said, oh no, I said, it was my ghostwriter. It was my wife and a whole bunch of other people. What happens immediately is I feel good. You feel good because I've done this. And when those people find out what I said, they feel it's a trifecta. So deflecting, and it's kind of maybe you trick yourself a little bit, but after a while it gets to be a habit, and it's wonderful. But those are principles that you want to have, and I put them on my wall. So I make sure that I never take the credit, and give it to somebody else, and it really worked. By the way, when you do that, you get it back in spades. I always say to people, especially in philanthropy, you always get back much more than you give. I mean, it's just in my life, it's been a it's the return I got for being chairman of the board of Rochester is unequaled to anything I did any place else.
Yeah, you have said a couple of times, you talk about your mantras, writing things on the wall, being very visual. How important was that for you? Because it seems like that's like what has guided you throughout your life.
Yeah, you're writing things down and looking at them really is one of the things that guided me through my life, and I think guides everybody through life, because you just can't get away from it if you write it down and read it. And if it's wrong, it's even better, because then you say, I can't do this. I want to be an international businessman. And what I mean, or write things down, and I want to be this kind of person. Let's find out what that kind of person is. In my book, I make a decision between being an analyst and an investment banker. Now, investment banker sounds much better, but when I came out of school, investment banker spent 8 years in servitude. An analyst within 3 months was on the road talking to CEOs of companies. But the guy who was interviewing me said, "Oh, you can't be an analyst. Those guys are gophers." Well, the gopher gets on an airplane and flies to San Francisco. The eagle, we call the banker an eagle. He's in the cellar doing spreadsheets for somebody. So you got to be careful what they call things. They're very deceiving. And and again, just like as I said, engineering has a huge continuum. When I got out of the Navy, I sent out 40 resumes, and I got 2 job offers, and they were totally different. One was in Lexington, Kentucky, to be an assistant plant manager, and the other one to enter a brand new field called plastics. In fact, I was 5 years before Dustin Hoffman. And I took the job in plastics because that was more my passion, do something new, interesting, and so forth, And then there was also Wilmington, Delaware, and the other was in Lexington, Kentucky. So I wanted to be closer to the East Coast.
You also mentioned later on you found out you were more like your mom. How did that make you feel? Um, did you ever meet your mom after your dad left? Because I can't remember in that part.
Yeah, well, that's the fable. That's the fiction. When I was 60, well, my dad died when I was 36, and he died suddenly of a heart attack. And I went to his apartment, and my mother-in-law took care of it. I just couldn't handle the whole thing. But he ended up with a suitcase full of letters, and I started looking at them, and they had bad memories. So I took them and put them in the house in Connecticut. And 24 years later, when I was 60 years old on a rainy Sunday, my wife, who throws things away, I don't throw things away, was going to throw the case away if I'd look in it. So I looked in it, and I found a package of letters I didn't recognize. And I went in and I found out my mother didn't die. So I hired a special investigator, and in a few months, he found her in St. Louis. And we had to struggle because we didn't know whether we really wanted to bring. I mean, I was a successful guy, nice family. Why do I want to bring this bad lady? My father described her as a bad person. But we eventually decided we would do it. And I wrote her a letter saying, I'm your son, I think. And she said, yes, you are. And so we went to St. Louis. We found a wonderful lady who, had been, after she got divorced from my father, she married another man, and she had another son who she didn't tell about me. She called him up and said, Phil, remember that brother you always wanted? And so Phil and I have become very close friends. He's a doctor in Lexington, Kentucky, in fact. And she lived for 12 years after we met. She was 81. Her second husband had died. And she was an absolute character. But she was a thinker and not a feeler. So when my father kidnapped me, she felt that because she had problems at home, that I might be better off with my father. She thought, she was a young girl. She was 24 years old. She thought she'd made a mistake by getting divorced, so she let me go. And she never looked for me, which was shocking. But sort of never got that answered. I spent a lot of time with her, but I never really got that answer. But she talked fast. She was in St. Louis, which nobody talks fast in St. Louis. As you can tell me, I talk fast. And she leans over the way I do. My wife keeps telling me to stand up straight. And she rhymes. She rhymes much better than I do. She can stand up and rhyme away. So there was a lot of connections. And she was really a thinker. She really thought things through. She would say to me, I'm really not your mother, because I didn't spend the time with you. And she was very different. My father was very emotional and, compulsive and so on and so forth. So, finding her added the other half to my life. And I realized that's, I was actually a little more like my mother than my father, which was shocking because, I look a little more like my father.
Wow, it must have been like you said that you went back and forth about whether or not you really wanted to bring her into your family, but then realizing that she didn't die, that must have been like a huge oh my gosh, what other lies did my dad tell me?
It was a horrendous. I mean, I couldn't believe it myself, but everybody believed that my mother passed away, and I told everybody the same story that she died when I was 3. All of a sudden now I have a mother and then a brother, a half brother. I mean, we actually spent almost 2 months thinking about whether we should even contact her because, why do that? Why we want to mess up everything? But she turned out to be a real friend of Barbara's mother, and her aunt. Both of them in their 90s. They all 3 of them, lived together for 12 years. It was quite a jolly experience, and she was a character, absolute character. A lot of the things that I'm. Sometimes my wife says you're funny, but you're not fun because I'm too serious. But my daughter was, my mother was very funny lady, told jokes all the time, and she was a character. 90th birthday, she had her eyes fixed. She wore high heels and drank martinis. I mean, it just so it was a great experience for me. And I had to call her every Sunday though. If I didn't call her on Sunday, she'd say after next week she'd say, long time between drinks of water. But it was it was a great having and it was a capstone of my life because it filled in a very big void that I had. I learned a lot about myself by being in contact with her.
Yeah, I love that. Now our time is almost up. Is there one last little nugget that you want to leave us with? It could be something that we've already talked about and you want to state your point, or it could be something that we haven't talked about yet that you would like to talk about.
I want to pitch my 8 words. That's all. I think that people should think of their lives in 4 parts: self, family, work, and community, word for giving back. And into those 4 areas, I want you to pour the 4 Ps: passions, principles, partners, and plans, and add your own, sauce to it as well. And then I would say take those at least once every 3 years, but at least I do it once a year. Take a long walk or go someplace. We go on a boat, and I sit in the afternoon and I write down each of the different things. And how do you divide your life up among these things? Because it is a balancing act.
Mm-hmm.
And you can, really make a small change and change how you're allocating your time between those 4 parts of your life. Sometimes you have to allocate more times to yourself. And sometimes, you haven't done the job in work. You're going to have to tell your family for the next couple of years, I'm going to work much harder. And therefore, I'm not coming home to dinner a couple nights a week. And but that's it. I guess my message is that the 3 words, the 3 things that I always tell people: anything is possible. I really believe that for young people. And education is the solution to everything, and it's a lifelong process. And last but not least, if you can not be a victim ever, just use your energy on my famous 2 words: what's next?
Mm. And that leads me up to the next question. What's next for you?
Well, it's this. Next for me is I'm trying to put this into every, I have a presumptuous plan to have every college student, just as you said, spend a little bit of their time when they're freshmen or sophomores or seniors thinking about themselves and writing down where they want to go and how they want to get there. That's my mission right now. Plus the fact I have a secondary mission. I'm really very excited about promoting what I call non-academic work. They used to call it vocational. I'm calling it professional. Nurses, marine engineers, hospitality workers, chefs. And we're doing this in Nantucket. We have, almost 30 or 40 kids now in non-academic education, which we're paying for. Because I really believe that's one of the solutions, is get kids to find their passion. Doesn't necessarily have to be, 14th century Western European history. It can be, cooking food. The chef, the young man we gave a scholarship to Johnson Wells, he's excited about making food for people, really. And so or the electrician that we need desperately, or the plumber, or the carpenter, they get great satisfaction on coming to your house and really getting something done, and you walk away feeling pretty good about it. So those are my 2 sort of nexts, I guess. That and trying not to get too old too quickly.
I love that. Now, where can people find you?
Well, I have my publicist, who's wonderful, has taken me. She says, you're non-celebrity, we're going to have to do that. I have a wonderful website, and I'm only Hajim in the world besides my kids. So it's Ed Hajim, www.edhajim.com. You can if you go to Amazon, just type in my name, you'll get my 2 books. All right. And, if you type my name into the internet too, I'm there as well for my University of Rochester stuff. And there's quite a bit of stuff. I'm much more public than I ever thought I would, or that I wanted to be. But that's the game of the game, I guess.
Yeah, you have to be kind of a little bit public, especially if you're an author and you have to promote your books and you want people to read it and you want it in the hands of every college student. You have to be a little public on that. You
have to be. And that's why you got to change your principles throughout life. The living happy to live hidden doesn't work as you're an author. Right? So you got to change it and understand the implications of it.
Yeah. Ed, thank you so much for coming on
and
for sharing your story.
You could have everybody you want. You got me.
Yeah, your book was so entertaining. When your publicist sent me your little thing, I was like, okay, I want him on. But then once I read the book, I was like, I'm so glad I booked him, because I just think that everybody needs to read this book.
One favor, go to Amazon, give me a rating and a review, please. Not 2 lines, but whatever it is, it helps.
I will. And for those that actually grab the book, go to Amazon and leave him a review.
We had a good time. I thank you very much. It's been fun.
All right. So guys, I will put in the show notes everywhere you can find Ed, as well as where you can find both his books. I'm going to go ahead and link both the books on Amazon. And plus, if you love this book, please leave a review for him, and also like and subscribe to my channel and to my podcast as well. Until next time, thank you again, Ed.
Thank you. No, have a great day.
All right.
The force will be with you.
Yeah. Bye, guys.
Bye.